Every now and again, Formula One throws its fans a bone and gives them something that goes against the norm of the best car being at the front and dominating. The 2020 season gave us numerous instances of this. Amid the dominance of arguably the best car Mercedes and Formula One have ever seen, numerous shocking moments saw midfield drivers racing at the front and even winning. From Gasly's maiden win at the Italian Grand Prix to Sergio Perez's last to first debut victory at Sakir, Formula One fans have had many moments to keep them off their seats in 2020. As Sergio Perez took his only win of the year in 2020 at Sakir, his teammate Lance Stroll joined him on the podium, his second podium of 2020. However, those two podiums could have been three, and not only just a podium, but a win. Because at that year's Turkish Grand Prix, Lance Stroll, amid all the criticism of his driving, had what may have been his standout performance in Formula One. Today's video seeks to go back to that moment, as we together relive the weekend where Lance Stroll put the Formula One world on notice. My name is Intern, Talk Wheel, and this is Turkey 2020, when Lance Stroll shocked the world. Jesus. Yeah. Midway through the 2020 season, and Formula One was ready for its next Grand Prix at Turkey? Yeah, Turkey. Thanks to the COVID-19 pandemic, the original Formula One schedule was canned. In the sport's new impromptu calendar, Turkey served as round 14 of the 2020 Formula One World Championship, the first Turkish Grand Prix since 2011. One of the biggest talking points of the 2020 season wasn't just Mercedes' almighty W11, but Racing Point's RP20, which had a striking resemblance to Mercedes' creation. The copycat model of Racing Point's 2020 Challenger had its pros and cons. The cons came in the form of a 15-point penalty coupled with a £400,000 fine for what the FIA says were illegally designed brake ducts. However, the pros, Racing Point now had their best car in years. Racing Point were now firmly in the fight for P3 in the Constructors, only 1 point behind third place Renault entering the Turkish Grand Prix. Despite missing 2 races due to contracting COVID, Sergio Perez was having a super consistent season, scoring points in every round as he tried to find himself a drive for 2020. Meanwhile, his teammate Lance Stroll had the complete opposite run of form. After scoring his second podium of his career at the Italian Grand Prix, Lance had possibly the worst stretch of races in his entire career. A puncture while going through a high-speed turn at Mugello turned what would have been a P4 into a destroyed car in the gravel and no points. His day would be destroyed before the end of lap 1 in Russia after contact from Charles Leclerc saw him take his second DNF in a row. He'd missed the Eiffel Grand Prix completely, similar to his teammate in Silverstone, after contracting COVID-19. And on his return to racing in Portugal, he'd make the same mistake that got him taken out in practice with Max Verstappen again in the race, this time turning in too early on Lando Norris. Capped off by a nightmare race at Imola, and Lance had now gone 5 straight races without scoring so much as 1 point. Lance needed a result, and he needed one quickly too. His team was right in the hunt for P3, and his already questioned image had taken multiple hits. Since his debut in the sport in 2017, Lance Stroll has always had to shake off being looked at as the stereotypical rich pay driver. With his dad taking over Racing Point in 2018, these claims grew even more, and Stroll to many looked like a mediocre driver who was only there at the mercy of his father Lawrence's deep pockets. However, Lance would strap into his car on a few occasions in his career and prove that he belonged in the sport. Looking back, one can cite his amazing first podium in Baku, where he kept a cool head despite the endless chaos around him to bag Williams' only podium of 2017, or even his first ever front row start in that same rookie season as he pulled off a stunning lap around Monza to put his car P4 on the grid, which became P2 after penalties. Stroll had proven that he was more than what many generalized him to be, a driver with decent racecraft and the ability to pull off miracles in the wet. Little did he know those traits would come in handy going into Turkey. A slippery return to Turkey caught the grid off guard, including Lance, who managed to go 13th in FP1. Lance would improve on his pace as the temperatures rose for FP2. Lance this time went P9, around almost 2 seconds slower than Max Verstappen, who topped both sessions at Istanbul so far. However, for FP3, the track would change to conditions that would remain for the rest of the weekend: wet conditions. As the rains came to Istanbul Park, Stroll went 10th fastest on inters as Max Verstappen completed his sweep of all the practice sessions going into quali. Conditions in quali were so treacherous that the session was red flagged midway through Q1. Verstappen topped Q1, going over 3 seconds faster than P3 as Stroll managed to slip by into Q2. Max would once again dominate in Q2 as Lance this time would go 4th fastest, 6 tenths behind Lewis Hamilton. One session of qualifying was left and all eyes were on Max Verstappen, who topped every single session of the weekend leading up to this point. All that was left was to put it on pole, and that's what Max originally did. He put down a 152.326 to go provisional pole, as everyone behind him couldn't even get within 3 seconds of his time, not even the Mercedes. That was until one man set a lap that was 1.5 seconds off. That man was Lance Stroll. Stroll's impressive lap put him P2 by a rather large margin. Racing Point would land another blow to the field as Perez on inters would go P1, almost 3 seconds clear of Max's lap. As it was evident inters were the quicker tire, the Q3 drivers made the switch and went for one more lap. With conditions the best they had been all day, Lance Stroll put an almighty lap with 2 purple sectors to take provisional pole by 1.5 seconds. But Max Verstappen was on a flyer and he matched Lance in sector 1. He was a bit slower in sector 2, but that was nothing. Max had literally topped every single session that weekend, and to end his Saturday in fine style, all he had to do was beat the silver spoon, no talent rich Canadian. And as he crossed the line to end his lap, the world stood shocked as Stroll's name didn't move from the top of the timesheet. Max was P2, almost 3 tenths slower. The first Racing Point pole since Fisichella in 09 at Spa. The first Canadian on pole since Jacques Villeneuve at the 1997 title decider in Jerez. Lance Stroll was on pole for the first time in his career, and he didn't do it through a perfectly timed red flag or some luck. He did it with nothing but the car underneath him and his talent as he took on some of the trickiest conditions the sport saw in ages to top the sport's biggest names. Lawrence Stroll may have paid for many things in Lance's career, but money couldn't buy that pole. Nothing could buy it. Only talent. As Lance celebrated, the job was not finished as the race would start under similar conditions. To win, Lance would have to replicate that lap from yesterday, but 58 more times. As he lined up on the grid, a mega start would be important as Max Verstappen would be looking to pounce as soon as possible as he remained frustrated from coming up short the day before. When the lights went out, Lance bolted off the line and comfortably led into turn 1 as teammate Perez got by Max for P2. Racing Point were now 1-2, but the fans expected the dominant Mercedes and Max Verstappen to easily pick them off as the race went on. Except that didn't happen. Instead, Lance from the lead paced himself and started to put distance between himself and Perez. Lance maintained the lead, and after the first cycle of pit stops, he had a 10-second lead by lap 13. Verstappen still remained a threat though. By lap 18, he caught the back of Sergio Perez in P2. An overtake on Perez would give Max a clear path to chase after Stroll. Max got caught in Checo's spray, causing him to lose control and spin all the way down to P6. With the biggest threat between Lance and the race win gone, he would continue on with his lead. Over time, Perez would start to eat away at Lance's lead as the big decision of the race would present itself. Drivers were pitting for a new set of inters, but what would Lance do? He was already making good pace on his worn tires, but Leclerc pit for fresh inters and was significantly faster than the rest of the field. Meanwhile, other drivers had no intentions of pitting, satisfied with the pace they had on the worn inters. By lap 36, Perez would close up to less than a second behind Lance as he questioned why the team was calling him into box. After communicating, Lance would give in and pull into the pits on lap 37 for a set of fresh inters. He came out in P4 right behind Max Verstappen, who hadn't yet pitted. Surely with fresher tires, Lance would replicate Leclerc's speed and blast by Verstappen, no? The answer was an unfortunate no. Lance's pace before pitting had completely disappeared as he had absolutely nothing for Verstappen. As a matter of fact, he had nothing left, period. As the laps went on, Lance, who once boasted a 10-second lead, was getting passed by drivers on tires that were more worn than his. Any hope of Lance making up the time to those who chose to take those worn inters to the end were dashed. As Lewis Hamilton went on to take the checkered flag, and with it a record equaling 7th World Championship, Lance crossed the line in P9, 1 minute and 12 seconds off the win that at one point looked like his. Racing Point's investigations eventually found the source of Lance's lack of pace, revealing that previously undetected front wing damage had caused Lance's tires to grain quicker than everyone around him. This meant that Lance was a sitting duck no matter what. Hamilton's tires were almost slick at the end of the race. Lance's graining meant that even chancing the race to the end without a second stop would have caused him to lose regardless. What once seemed like a win that finally would prove the haters wrong ended up being a P9, which at face value would make haters say, yeah, same old Stroll. But those that watched that weekend saw a different side of Stroll, one that only showed itself on a couple occasions prior. A mature drive to pole and a mature drive to keep that lead for 35 laps. Stroll remains to me one of the weirdest drivers in Formula 1. Just when you think you've gathered enough evidence to call him a trash driver, he pulls a masterclass out of nowhere that justifies his spot in the sport. He's quite the anomaly, and regardless of your opinion on his driving, his performance in Turkey was a masterclass and a true reflection of what he can do at his peak. And remember, he's still quite young. My name is Intern, I talk wheel, and thanks for watching.
Yeah.